Welcome to Grief and Gratitude Podcast. We're your hosts, Mandy and Crystal.
This is a space for honest conversations about loss, healing, and everything in between. Each week, we share stories, perspectives, and moments that remind us that even in the hardest seasons, gratitude can still exist. Thank you for sharing space with us. We're really glad you're here. Welcome to Grief and Gratitude Podcast. We are here today with Crystal and Caroline. I'm going to hand it over to Crystal so she can introduce our guests.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We are here again for episode 13. We are speaking with a very, very good friend of mine, Caroline. We met over 20 years ago in a college course and have remained very, very close friends over the years. And Caroline is here today to share her story. Caroline, good to have you here. Feel free to get started when you're ready.
Thank you. Well, Crystal already knows my story, but I'm sure there's parts of it that you don't know, Crystal. I guess I'll start with just how Jonathan and I met, my husband. We've been married now since 2019, so I guess almost 7 years. And we met in December of 2014, so it was almost 2015. And we dated for, a few years and got married in 2019. Crystal, you were there at the wedding. And so Jonathan, I knew when we were together before, of course, getting married, that he was diagnosed with bipolar when he was in his early 20s in college. He had his first depressive episode when he first went to college. He went to Berkeley and he had to go home because he just was too depressed. And that was the first sign that they realized he was bipolar. And then he had a manic episode in New York when he was visiting cousins. And so I knew about those episodes, but since we were together, he was medicated and had done a lot of therapy. And when you meet him, you would never know that he was bipolar because he managed it really well. And when we were together, he never had any episodes. And so it felt, it's a difficult thing for someone to have to experience, but it felt like it was really well maintained. And I'm a therapist. And so, at the time when I first met him, I was in grad school getting my master's in counseling psychology and in-depth psychology. And so I was very well versed in this stuff and, have a great deal of empathy being a therapist. And so I felt like his diagnosis made me love him even more. And even though I was concerned and worried, about having children, can be hereditary, I still was not willing to not be with him because of it, of course. So that's a little bit of the backstory of his bipolar. As I said, we got married in 2019. We had an amazing honeymoon in New Zealand, also in 2019 in November. And it was just like the most amazing honeymoon you could ever imagine. We're there for 3 weeks. We did the most adventurous things. We went bungee jumping. We went, zip lining. We just did all these amazing things. And then when we got back, life got more serious. I got pregnant, which was very exciting. That's what we wanted. And we got a puppy. And we were moving into a new house, which was, more money. And so Jonathan and I were both working really, really hard. I remember I was working Saturdays all day just because we wanted to save money and, get ready to have the baby and all the changes. And Jonathan started getting really stressed out in a way that I'd never seen him before. And now looking back, there were a lot of signs. But at the time, I just thought he was anxious and stressed. But it got really bad, and there started to be pretty clear signs of paranoia leading up to the accident that I'm going to tell you about. We were signing a new lease with this landlord, and he started getting paranoid about the landlord, thinking that they were trying to scam us in some way. He didn't want to sign this paperwork. There were just lots of signs like that. And in retrospect, it was so obvious, and I should have done something about it. Even the night before his accident, he was really, really paranoid. And we had plans to go see his psychiatrist together. That I think it was a Friday night. that I'm talking about, and we were going to go see his psychiatrist together on the Monday. So I just kept thinking, okay, we'll hold out, till the Monday and we'll talk to his psychiatrist. We both had busy work days that Saturday. I had 8 clients in a row, which is like, as you know, so much, like the most anyone should ever have, probably too much. And then I remember I had a training after that. So I was supposed to go to a seminar. And so I was really busy. But that morning we woke up and I could tell he was not in his right mind. But he would go in and out of being in his right mind. One moment he felt like really manic and I was concerned. And then the next minute he would talk about our dog and needing to take the dog for a walk. And I felt like, okay, like he's got this. He's okay. I have to go to work. He's going to go to work. I told him, just keep checking in with me. I'm going to keep checking in with you. And again, in retrospect, I should have just immediately taken him to the hospital. But I went to work and he did as well. And then throughout the day, in between clients, I kept checking in on him and realizing like, wow, he's not himself. Something's really, really wrong. And, I was scared and I told him at one point, just come. He went to his parents' house a few times. He kept going to his parents' house, which was near my office, my work office. And I said, just come to me, come to my office. And he said, okay. And then I was waiting for him and he never showed up. And I was terrified and called his parents and his dad said, he was just here. I don't know, where he is. And then his phone was shut off. And I've never been so scared in my whole life. Like I knew something bad was happening, but I, was hopeful that I don't know, that maybe he took himself to the hospital. I didn't know, but I was really scared. And so I finished my day. I finished all of my clients miraculously, but then I didn't go to the training and I went home and my best friend came over and I just kept calling and it kept going straight to voicemail and it was so terrifying. And I was crying and talking to his parents on the phone and sort of screaming and crying and just being like, I'm so scared. Like, where is he? What's going on? And eventually got a call. His parents got a call from the emergency room and then they called me and I was hopeful that like he had turned himself into the emergency room because I knew that when he had his manic episode back when he was in his 20s, that he did go to the hospital and he was okay. And so I was thinking, okay, hopefully that's what happened. And then I talked to someone on the phone in the ER and I asked them like, is he okay? And the woman said, well, he's talking. And I just remember thinking, what does that mean? Like, well, of course he's talking, and just so scared. And so his dad, I think, came over to pick me up and we went to the emergency room together. And I'll never forget. I mean, it was just the most awful time I've ever experienced in my life. It was also COVID. So this was March 2020, March 7th, 2020, which I don't know if you guys remember, but that week soon after is when the shutdown happened. So this was right before the shutdown. So I was also, keep in mind, pregnant and just terrified of COVID, but also just so distracted by what was happening. But there were so many people in the emergency room and I was just couldn't have felt more awful. It was so scary. And they were making me wait. We got there and we're like, what's happening? We need to see him. And everybody was just kind of looking at me like they were nervous for me to find out what happened. I remember one of the ladies said they called him something. I forget. They made up some different name. It wasn't his name, but then they said the trauma unit. I was like, what's trauma mean? Even though, of course, I know what the word means. But in that case, I was like, what does that mean? And I was just panicking and people were not giving me what I needed and not telling me anything. And I had to wait for way too long. And eventually they said, we're going to send the social worker down to talk to you. And so I was just like, what's happening? And finally they did. And then they explained to me that, and this is really hard to talk about, even 6 years later. But they told me that he had jumped off of an off ramp on the freeway and he was, likely paralyzed. I don't remember exactly what they told me, but something along those lines. And I just remember falling to the ground and crying. And his dad was like, what? We were both just in complete shock and like just so distraught. And I said, but that can't be. I'm pregnant. Like, what? No, I'm pregnant. What? It just didn't feel real. And I remember calling my parents immediately and telling them what happened and saying, my life is over. And they were saying, no, it's not over, and we'll jump on a plane. They live up in Northern California. So I live in LA and it's an hour flight. And they said, okay, we're heading to the airport right now. We'll be there. And then I saw Jonathan, they wheeled him in. And I mean, I don't want to even get into the details of what I saw. It was just so hard to see. And he seemed like he was in his right mind at that time. And he was just kind of crying and saying to me, like, I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. I'm so sorry. And, I just felt like so much love for him and just hugged him. And again, still really unclear of what's happening. And everything happened so fast. It's hard to remember everything. But then they had to wheel him into surgery and he had multiple surgeries. And I just remember waiting. Well, also, one thing that really stuck out in my mind is that his mouth was really dry. He couldn't have any water because he had to go into therapy. And so he just was begging for water and they couldn't give him any. They were giving him like wet sponges or something. I don't know. He couldn't have any liquids for surgery. So that was awful to see. And then they wheeled him away and I had to go sit in the waiting room of the emergency during COVID in just shock and fear. I called one of my best friends and she was already with me, I think. I can't remember, but one of my friends waited with me and, we were there for hours and different doctors and nurses kept coming in and checking in on me. I was pregnant and I didn't want to eat, but they were telling me you really need to eat. And my friend went and got me food and I was just trying to take care of myself, but it was so hard. And then I remember finally going home because they said, he's going to be in surgeries. He's going to be out of it. Like, you need to take care of yourself. You're pregnant. So I went home. My parents, got there and then I tried to get some sleep. And I just remember saying, like, to the doctor or whoever was going to call me when he was out of surgery, like, I left my phone on and they called me. And, a lot of those memories are sort of hard to remember. That, that was kind of that part of the story. And then I remember, actually, I think before, I forgot to tell this part, which was just so horrific. Before he went into surgery, he asked for me. And so I remember going up to see him. A doctor came down to get me and going up to see him. And, he just looks so upset and just, of course, like, how could he not be in pain, excruciating pain? And I had to sign some paperwork and I remember asking one of the doctors, like, is he ever going to be able to walk again? And, just like not believing that was true, like having, wanting to have hope. And they were saying, the guy said, no, it's very unlikely. And maybe a less than 5% chance. And I just couldn't believe it. It was so unfathomable to me. And so then I had to go back down to the emergency or to the waiting room where my friend was. And I got lost in the hospital. And I just remember walking in these hallways, like these blank, white walls, hallways. No one was there and trying to find the elevator and like just feeling like I was in a complete nightmare, like the worst situation of my life, which I mean, it really was. And so then finally, I went back and found my friend. But that part really stuck out with me because an already bad situation. And then I was lost and alone and just so scared. And then, the days after that were just really, as you can imagine, so many surgeries, so many calls with the doctors. I was obviously in the hospital every day with him, trying to figure out what to do as far as one of the really big. So he fell when he jumped, he fell onto his legs. And so his legs were just completely shattered. And also I want to say, because a lot of people, when they hear that he jumped, they assume that he wanted to commit suicide. But I think it's really important to clarify that with his bipolar, he was in a complete psychotic state. So he was not himself. He was not in his right mind. And he did not, people I've talked to after the fact are like, well, but he jumped and he knew he could die. So he did want to kill himself, right? But he didn't. He thought that he did it because he thought that people were after him and that he was going to be killed. And so he was trying to escape these people, whoever they were. And so he just wasn't in his right mind. And when he woke up and came to, he, felt so regretful and so obviously like not what he wanted for his life. But he was grateful to be alive. And I mean, I, of course, was really grateful that he was alive. It was a miracle that he was able to survive that. And I'm trying to think, I mean, there's so much to the story.
I think,
So go ahead.
Caroline, if you want, because I believe from your story, right, there's kind of layers to it, right, with even being pregnant, but just to settle on what you just said, I think is really important for people that do not have a good understanding or grasp on what psychosis is and the reality of mental illness. And it's hard for people to fathom unless they have like a direct link, right? If they've seen it, right? Where we can understand someone who has a medical diagnoses or need that makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily make sense when it's a mental illness. But that's what it was. And I want to be sure those listening, and knowing you so well and knowing Jonathan like I do, this is a man who so much loves you and loves the family you two have created. And what has really stuck most with me is the power of love. Like, even in that moment of being in and out of his state of mind, that he asked for you and that he
Hmm.
came to you is really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think too that, as you were saying, people that don't understand it, that Caroline did. And even though she knew he was diagnosed with bipolar, that she still wanted to be with him. And I think that's pretty amazing too.
Yeah. I really loved him and I still do, of course. And, it was one of those things where I just couldn't imagine my life without him and I didn't want to not be with him. And so, but of course, one of the biggest parts of grief here is that I imagined even, despite his diagnosis, like we still had a normal life leading up to this beautiful life. And we were so excited, being pregnant and moving into a new house and having a puppy. And there were so many things that we were excited about. And I'm someone that, has always been romantic and like dreamy about like finding my husband. And, I've wanted that my whole life. I've searched for it. And one of the hardest parts was just like that dream felt like it was shattered. And when it first, happened, I couldn't imagine having a normal life at that point. It felt like I said to my parents, my life is over. Like the dream that I, was imagining for myself is over. And I'll get into that, I think, a little bit later more about how my life is now. But I want to add the part about my son. And so when the accident happened again, it was March 7th, 2020. And my son was not due until October, supposed to be October of 2020, just so that during that time that when Jonathan was in the hospital, I was able to see him for about a week. And then the shutdown happened and they would not let me see him anymore. And it was just absolutely horrific. He's alone in the hospital and I can't see him and no one can see him. And so that was a huge, part that was really hard. And then it's COVID. I had to move into the new house on my own. And again, COVID, so no one could really help me. My parents were supposed to come in to help. They were on their way to help me. They were driving from Northern California. About an hour into the drive, they got a call that they had been exposed to COVID. And so they couldn't come. So they had to turn around because I was pregnant. Of course, they can't risk me getting COVID. And so they had to turn around. And I had one friend, luckily, that was able to stay with me and just help me. Because, I had other friends that were either, they were worried that they could have had COVID or been around it, or I had a friend that just had a baby. All my best friends like wanted to be there for me, but they literally couldn't. And it was just, I mean, as you can imagine, just so hard. Again, people on this podcast have described when you wake up and you just can't remember, like, is this real or is this a nightmare? It feels like a nightmare and you just wait. You wait for it to wake up and hope that it's going to end, but it doesn't. You realize like, no, this is real. That's just such a hard feeling every morning to wake up to that. But so that, all of that hardship Jonathan in the hospital. Then they moved him to a rehab facility, and I didn't see him for a whole 2 months, I think, because of COVID. Um, yeah. And then I remember when he finally came home, it was just so hard. Everything was just hard adjusting to his new life, in a wheelchair. And I was trying to manage taking care of him, but also taking care of myself being pregnant. Remember, it was really hot, it was summer, and just having breakdowns, just like melting down like a toddler, like screaming and crying, just in such despair. And because of all that stress, my water broke at 29 weeks of pregnancy. But when it happened, I didn't realize that that's what it was. I was naive and just so, couldn't think that that would be possible. But I was gushing, water. And I thought I just peed in myself. But I remember then I told my mom and my sister, and they were all kind of concerned, of course. And the next morning, I emailed my doctor, and the doctor in the morning called me right away and was like, "You need to come in right away." So I went in, and thinking like, I just parked my car in 2 hours, thinking, okay, they'll tell me, they'll do whatever they need to do and then send me home. But it ended up being that it was amniotic fluid and that my water had broke. And I was at 29 weeks. And I, again, was just so shocked. Couldn't believe that that was even a possibility. And COVID again. So no one can really be there. And I was worried about Jonathan. I remember saying like, no, again, like, no, this can't be because I have a husband at home that I need to help take care of. And I have a puppy and like, no, my car's in 2 hours, just wanting to will it away. They were like, sorry, but you have to stay. You're staying here in the hospital until the baby's born. And this was July. And the baby, wasn't supposed to be born until October. And so I had no idea, that babies could survive at such a young age. For me, it felt like if the baby was born, it wouldn't survive or it wouldn't be possible, or wouldn't be healthy, so I was just terrified. Then one of my best friends was able to come and my husband was able to come and they were there with me. And I was in the hospital for a whole week before they eventually had to wheel me in for emergency C-section. And that, in itself was just another extremely traumatic event. I was asleep in the middle of the night and I woke up to just about it felt like 10 nurses and doctors. It was probably fewer than that, but it felt like so many people just rushing into the room, waking me up, ripping off my clothes and wheeling me into surgery. I remember begging them, like, please make sure my baby's okay. Like, is everything, asking them, is everything going to be okay? And I remember praying to my grandma who had passed a long time before. But my mom always told me, anytime it has to do with babies, pray to grandma because she had 9 children herself and loved babies. And so I prayed really, and she was Catholic. So I'm not religious myself, but I prayed really hard to her. And I said, please, grandma, like whatever you do, I just need my baby to be okay. I just need my baby to be okay. And then next thing, I woke up so out of it, in so much pain. I'm just like screaming in pain because I think the local anesthesia after my C-section didn't work or wasn't working well for me. And so I was in so much pain, but right away they told me my baby was okay. He was 3 pounds, 9 ounces. And yeah, I mean, he's now, just for the listeners, like he's okay. He's healthy. He's 5.5, really healthy. Like you would never know that he was born as early as he is. And, talk about gratitude. I'm so, so, so grateful for that. But again, just a really, really hard time. And I remember at that time when the first day after he was born, he had to stay in the NICU for 2 months as well. But that first day, just crying in the hospital bed, and my best friend was there with me and she got in bed with me. And I remember just saying like, I can't handle this. And at that time, I still didn't know if he was going to be okay. Like they said at the time he was healthy, things were okay, but you just don't know how, your 3-pound baby is going to develop. And so I remember saying to my friend, I I could handle this if Jonathan's accident hadn't happened. Like if Jonathan were here and healthy and standing by my side, I could handle this, but I can't handle this on top of everything. And just crying and crying. And she, held me in bed, and she's such a dear friend. And so then, 2 months, visiting him every day in the NICU, and Jonathan and I both would have to take a handicap Uber to the hospital because I couldn't drive after surgery and Jonathan couldn't drive. And so it was just a whole ordeal with COVID, but we got through it, and here we are.
It's amazing for you to say. The fact that Jude is 5.5 blows video of him dancing.
I
The
know.
other day, he was so little, and he really, all of 4 pounds, I mean, he just developed beautifully. And that,
He really
talk
did.
about gratitude, it's so amazing that he made it through. Can you tell us a bit about, what life, how you got here? Like, what is life like now? How have you created your world in a way that's meaningful to you?
Yeah. So life, of course, was really hard in the beginning, but thank God for Jude, our baby, because he was such a healthy, happy distraction. And, even though the NICU was hard, it gave us purpose every day. We'd get up, we'd go there, we'd spend all day. So that structure was really good for us at the time. And, the early, months, well, Crystal came to visit and help as well, which was a lifesaver and just so healing and helpful. But yeah, just because of COVID as well, we were home. And so that gave us the time to adjust to Jonathan, being in the wheelchair and heal from all of his, from the accident and the surgeries and everything. And that was just, that was a time where we were able to just be together and focus on Jude. I think he brought us so much joy in those early years, and he still does, of course. But that he just became the focus, and we were able to spend the time together at home because of COVID. And so in some ways, even though COVID was awful, it was being able to be home, all of us together, was a blessing in disguise. And then, I have my work, which has always been really meaningful to me, and I've continued to do it the entire time. I remember still working right after Jonathan's accident. I don't know how I did it. I took some time off, of course, when I had the baby, but my work has helped me, and having, just amazing friends and family as support. And, of course, Jonathan did, physical therapy and rehab, and his attitude has been absolutely amazing. People always ask me, how's he doing? And, you know, I have always said, all things considered, pretty well. He's never, fallen into a depression since everything, which is really surprising and hard to fathom. But he has a good attitude. And I mean, of course, he's takes his medication, and he hasn't had any episodes since, and so he's been stable in that sense. It's been a huge life change, of course, but there are ways that we've been able to maintain a somewhat normal life. We try to just do as many things as we can. First trip we took, well, we've taken a lot of like small trips, traveling to local places, but we went to Hawaii a few years ago for my 40th birthday, and that was really special. And just learning all the, ways. There's things that we didn't know on that first flight that, we'll next time we'll know. Learning how to manage everything with him being in a wheelchair. But I would just say, yeah, I mean, his attitude is what makes it work. I would, if he were angry, or, I mean, not to say that we couldn't work through that. And of course he has his days where he's, he's sad, and he's in a lot of physical pain. His legs, he has to deal with a lot of pain. Things are, of course still hard, but we just really try to move forward and do what we can.
So I've never heard your story, and I was going to say how inspiring you both are, because it's not the life either of you thought was going to be when you decided to get together and get married and have a child, but you're still together and you're still pushing through, and you have this beautiful baby, and it's just amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Caroline, can you Tell us how, I know Jonathan, I met him before, right? A few times and been at your wedding and after. So I have seen Jonathan throughout, but would you say in terms of your relationship, you talk to, right, his good mood kind of in personality, but has that changed much? Your connection, would you say, what you went through together, did it make you stronger? What did it require for you two to go through so many changes together?
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's made us, closer. How could it
Mhm.
not? Like, we've been through so much together. And
Mhm.
every time, even after there were a lot of other things, nothing, of course, as big as those things, but we've had some other difficult events. And every time, we just kind of look at each other and say, like, oh my God, we've been through so much together. And the love is always there and we're always supportive of each other. And yeah, I mean, it definitely makes us closer. It's not, it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound like everything's, just, oh,
Mhm.
it's love and rainbows and, it's hard. Our lives are harder than they would have been, obviously, if this
Mhm.
hadn't happened. But I have to just believe in the depth that we've grown because of everything. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and it does. Would you say for Jonathan, even I'm a psychotherapist. And so the majority of clients I work with actually have a diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia or depression with psychotic features. And I found through my clients that there's this shame that they can have around their diagnosis. And they've often said to me, like, listen, I just wish like I broke a bone, or I wish I was diagnosed with cancer. Like, I wish I had something that was explainable,
Mhm.
because there's actually millions of people with a bipolar diagnosis, right? And as you explained for Jonathan, you absolutely can have a combinations of things, from medication to good therapy to a good support system,
Right.
and you wouldn't know it, right? But have
Right.
you found that for Jonathan, it has been that has he received, do you think, kind of the love and care not only from you and those close to him? Do you feel like it's been understood, or has there been shame too that he's had to work through, or that you two have
Yeah.
had to do together?
Thank you for asking that question. That's a really important one. And, so before the accident, he was very secretive about his diagnosis. He didn't
Mm,
tell anyone, any of his close friends. No one knew. I didn't tell any of my close friends
mm,
because it was his secret or his diagnosis. It wasn't mine to, share. Of course, my family knew and, super close friends, but or maybe not even my super close friends because he didn't tell his friends. But then after the accident, there was no hiding, right? There was no hiding it. He had a physical manifestation of his mental diagnosis. And so he had to be open about it. And he had to tell his close friends and people in his life, tell everybody that we meet. But he's much more open about it. And I think he's just come to terms with like, this is who I am. And there's no hiding it. I mean, I think at this point of his life, he's accepted it because what else could he do, right? But there definitely has been shame, and I think because he was in the past, he presented as normal. I'm put in quotes, and he's a handsome guy, and he would get through life. But now people see him; he's in a wheelchair. I think it's been a journey for him as far as his acceptance of the diagnosis. But I
mhm,
will say that some people, we have some really close friends that have always been supportive of us, and nobody has said, I shame Jonathan for being bipolar or for being in a wheelchair, but he has lost some friends. And part of it is, just life goes on, people move on, and he's some of his friends have moved to other states, have children, things change. So I'm not saying that people are consciously discriminating, his friends are discriminating against him in that way, but I think there's an unconscious part of people that can't handle it. Like it's too
mm.
much. They didn't know that about him. Now they do. And it's painful, And so that does make me sad. And again, I don't blame people. that when his accident first happened, I did have a lot more anger, and I sort of projected a lot of that anger outward, especially with COVID, because everybody was dealing with a crisis at the time, which was, it was a global crisis. And so everyone was freaked out about COVID, and obviously understandably. But for me, it felt like, how could they be so worried about COVID when I'm dealing with this? But again, the anger piece, like I was angry at some of his friends or some people, at that time that felt like they weren't really there for him. But I also understand that people, I think you've talked about this, Crystal, like people have a certain capacity, and, that's their path, and I can't blame them. And I don't think it's conscious. I think for some people, it's like they don't realize it, but they can't handle it. It's too much.
Yeah. No, you you explain that well. Like, it is unconscious, at least not conscious, right? But someone who finds out something then feels different. And because it feels so uncomfortable within them, they just shift away.
Mm-hmm.
Even to think of Jonathan now, granted, him being in a wheelchair, right, experiences occurred. So his life, anyhow, our life changes if we go through any experience. But Jonathan, whether or not he was in a wheelchair, is Jonathan,
Right.
right? He was his
Right.
wife. Me as someone who cares so much, like when I see him for Jonathan. But
Mm-hmm.
there are individuals that see someone in a circumstance, and for some reason, it just like feels too sad to them. So they
Mm-hmm.
then think differently.
Right.
And they might not be able to really sit in that discomfort, right? Or
Right.
move to discomfort.
And I'm so grateful for the people that can.
Mm.
People always talk about this, when you've been through something tragic, and, you see who's really, really there for you, and you see who those close friends are. And I definitely have, a good group of friends that can handle it and have been there and are supportive. You obviously included.
Thank you. Yeah, I love you guys. Can you tell us how you've changed? You as a person, whether it be, your personality, your goals, your wishes, how are you different from before?
Yeah. I will be honest, because I was thinking about when you asked the question about Jonathan too, and I talked about his attitude, being positive and everything. There is a spark, that I think is missing from both of us. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. We're not as silly and playful and lighthearted as we once were. It's like, how could you be? And I think you guys can probably relate, when you've been through something so traumatic and tragic, it's like you're not going to see the world the same. So I feel like when it first happened, I kept saying like nothing matters. Like the small stuff nothing matters, like other than the love that you have for the people in your life that are really close to you, and your health and all the cliche things that people say, but it's so true. And so I think, yeah, I have less capacity for BS,
Mhm.
and for people that don't have depth and aren't there, aren't willing to talk about really important, deep things. But as far as, I'm trying to think of other like positive ways. I mean, as I said, with my career, I feel like it's made me grow as a therapist. And, I always keep striving ahead, with my career and wanting to be the best mom I can be. And friendships are so important to me. My, relationships, I just continue to work on. And yeah, I think that's how I would answer that.
It stops you in your tracks, right? When a significant loss or tragedy occurs, it can kind of just like wipe the life out of you for a second, right? And I remember when I first got to you, Jude was baby. How old was Jude? Like
He
all of
was
a
a
few,
couple months, like 2 months,
yeah,
maybe
like
3.
baby, and us going on a walk with Nelsie Newsy, your dog,
Yeah.
and me asking you, like, "How are you?" And you're like, "I just like, things will just never be the same." And you speaking of that heaviness and that light. And then I remember, I mean, days later, but I was like, the light, it's there. right?
Right.
It's in you, and I was just because that was how I remember Jonathan too, right? His funny dance, the dance he would do, right, at the
Right.
wedding and everything, and
And he can
that
still do it in
that
the wheelchair just differently.
yes, yes, and him doing it, and it's like it's almost like the light, it's like, say it's a candle, like the candle doesn't stay on as long, but it's there, right? And it's
Mhm.
really hard to access it when you've gone through so much. And you just, I mean, it was the perfect storm for sure. I think with all of the changes at once, good or bad, that were happening, right from a wedding to pregnancy to an amazing honeymoon and all the things. It was just like the combination of things occurred, and then things went south for quite a while, and
Yeah.
you're still here and you're still doing it. And I believe um your clients are very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you. And yours are too.
I was just wondering, with all of the heaviness and like, why is this happening with Jonathan's accident and then the baby coming early? What, how did you get to the positiveness that you are now? Or was there something that just made you think that? Or was it a journey to get there? How did that happen?
Oh, I think time, obviously, people always talk about time heals, and that's
Mhm.
true. I mean, I never wanted to let Jonathan's accident, completely destroy our lives. So even from the beginning, I remember, and it was COVID too. I keep saying that, but such a significant time. I remember having Jude, a new baby, and we still would travel to local, we went to Santa Barbara, San Diego, stay in nice hotels because hardly anyone was doing that. And, just still living life, still trying to do, everything I can to have some normalcy. Just again, the friends, being surrounded by people that we love. I just remember too, like really good meals, food. We've always been foodies and we had a lot of good meals during that time. I don't know. I think it's just, there's no real significant answer to that. I think it's just a matter of, time and finding parts of ourselves that keep coming back. And I wish I had a more like eloquent way to explain it, but
Well, I guess the gratitude for your son surviving and thriving makes it kind of easy
yes.
to be like thankful for this life. And like you said, the cliche, the little things. And
Right.
yeah.
Definitely Jude was the number one reason that we, found happiness in our lives and still do. Yeah, even in the times which were soon after the accident, when Jude was there, I do remember feeling just like some of the happiest times of my life too. It's interesting to have like the most tragic and the happiest at the same time. Crystal, I know you can relate to that with having your baby right after
Well,
your
yeah,
sister's
and
passing.
of course. I mean, within days of finding out I was pregnant with Casey, Jen passed. And it was, right, the most difficult time. And also, it saved me that I was pregnant, right? That
Mhm.
got me through that. And then having her. And yeah,
Right.
I get that. And I remember being with you and Jude, you and Jonathan, didn't we go out for his birthday?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there, and us getting back, and it was, I think, his first maybe time out, and we did dinner and it was nice, and getting back, and I think he was changing Jude, and it was just like really stinky, and him just like laughing in such a way, like everything about Jude made Jonathan smile. Every little, right, like change of his face or coo, like it was
Mhm.
such a hard time and also such a beautiful time. And I imagine it gave him hope to get up and go through. It is not, I can only imagine, but not easy having to manage a new life like that. And he would
Right.
just get up and do all the things.
Right. Yeah. There was something I was just going to say and I completely lost it. It was
Mhm.
important.
Was it about Jonathan, I guess, even the hardships? I don't know if you were thinking of that, because when I was thinking back to that time too, I'd have to say, I don't know that I would have understood the weight and challenges someone has to go through newly handicapped, right? Partially fully paralyzed. All that he had to do to get through every day. Talk about strength.
Okay, that helped me remember what I was going to say, which was, again, a cliche thing, but so grateful that he is alive. That is what has helped us through too, because he really, I hate to say should have died, but I mean, everybody in the hospital was saying like, it's a miracle that he's alive. And so that miracle, just holding on to that miracle. And I remember, Crystal, when you were visited, when Jude was newborn and soon after Jonathan's accident, maybe on that same walk we've talked about, you saying, I would do anything to have Jen back. If she were in a wheelchair, I'd be so grateful. And that really helped me put things in perspective too. It's like, he's here and I still get to talk to him and I still get to laugh with him and still get to love him. And I'm grateful every day, that he's alive. And of course, like as life goes on, you think about that less often, but that's a really powerful part of how we've gotten through all of it.
To have each other, right? It may not be what you dreamed up, right? Or saw for your life. I mean, and not to take that lightly, right? Like known you for 20 plus years. I mean, your love of traveling, certain things, right? That require a lot of movement is part of who you are. And still you and Jonathan and Jude have managed to stay together and stay strongly together to love each other here and now. And I just think it's beautiful. I'm honored that you were willing to do this and to share your story here. I believe, especially around mental health and mental illness and diagnoses, we really need to normalize the reality of it.
Probably a lot more people than you realize have these diagnoses.
Yes, absolutely.
Or go undiagnosed because
Right.
they are afraid to go to the doctor.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So thank you. And we look forward to sharing this and maybe doing a part 2 someday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for
Bye.
listening.
Consider being a supporter of the show by downloading episodes, subscribing to the podcast, or clicking the support link in the show notes. You can also leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. If you would like to share your story, please message the Facebook or Instagram page. You can also email griefandgratitudepodcast@gmail.com. Tune in next Monday for an all-new episode. This podcast was created to honor the memory of Declan Shaw ONeil and Jennifer Lynn Berry.